Long ago, in a world where the night was darker, the forests were deeper, and magic seemed to whisper from the shadows, people believed in things that today we might laugh at, or dismiss as fairy tales. Imagine a time when the mere mention of a witch could send shivers down your spine, and the thought of demons and angels walking among humans was as real as the air you breathe. This was the world of the Middle Ages, a time when superstition and faith ruled the hearts and minds of ordinary people, and the church wielded immense power over every aspect of life. In the Middle Ages, even the most learned men of the time, like Erasmus and Sir Thomas More, accepted the existence of witchcraft. These were not just stories told by the uneducated. The church itself encouraged superstitions, telling tales of satyrs, incubi, and giants, explaining that these creatures were manifestations of Satan. The church taught that the Prince of Darkness was as real as the Holy Trinity, and that fear of the devil was a stronger motivator for good behavior than the love of God. Priests would perform grand exorcisms, where they claimed to banish demons from the bodies of possessed individuals, and these shows traveled across the continent, drawing crowds who believed in their power. The church also sanctioned the legitimacy of specific miracles, and pilgrims would travel from far and wide to visit shrines where these miracles were said to have occurred. These pilgrims were simple people, often dressed in brown wool robes, carrying heavy staffs and sacks slung from their belts. They were driven by devotion and the hope that their prayers might help a recently departed relative in purgatory. Despite their appearance, these pilgrims were usually treated with respect, as many people believed that showing kindness to a stranger might mean they had entertained angels unawares. One of the most popular destinations for pilgrims was the tomb of Pierre de Luxembourg, a young cardinal who had died at the age of 18 due to anorexia. Within just 15 months of his death, 1964, miracles were attributed to him, and people believed that his bones possessed magical powers. Saints were often associated with specific ailments. For example, Saint Vitus was believed to be particularly effective in curing cholera. The church also claimed to have relics from the life of Christ, such as the manger where he was born and the steps he climbed while wearing a crown of thorns. People flocked to these sites, believing that they could touch the divine and receive healing or blessings. Travel in the Middle Ages was a daunting and dangerous undertaking. It was slow, expensive, and uncomfortable. For those who could afford it, traveling by coach was the slowest option, while walking was faster, and horseback was the quickest. However, horseback travel was rare, because of the need to change and stable horses regularly. The expenses of travel were mostly due to the numerous tolls that had to be paid at every bridge in town. The roads were often in terrible condition, with bridges that were shaky and rivers that had to be forded. Travelers had to spend nights in Europe's wretched inns, which were unsanitary and filled with pests like rats and fleas. Innkeepers were often untrustworthy, and travelers had to be wary of theft and other dangers. One of the greatest perils of travel was the threat of highwaymen. These criminals were pitiless thieves, kidnappers, and killers who thrived because they were rarely pursued by law enforcement. Outlaws often hid in the woods and ambushed travelers, sometimes traveling in roving gangs or disguising themselves as beggars or pilgrims. The lack of law enforcement in rural areas meant that travelers were largely on their own, and even local lords often turned a blind eye to the activities of bandits, provided they were given gifts at Christmas. To protect themselves, travelers carried well-honed daggers and often traveled in groups for safety. However, even in these groups, English travelers were often excluded. The English were distrusted and suspected of petty theft, and their merchants were known for using false weights and selling shoddy goods. English women were particularly unwelcome because they were known for their foul language, and the English in general were seen as insolent and self-centered. Despite the dangers and discomforts, the pilgrims of the Middle Ages continued to travel, driven by their faith and the hope of miracles. Their journeys were a testament to the power of belief and the enduring human desire to connect with something greater than themselves. In a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural was often blurred, these pilgrims were willing to face incredible risks to seek out the divine, a belief that shaped the lives of millions and left a lasting legacy on the history of Europe.